Joining us now is Sid Koop. He's the founder and director of Truth Matters Ministries, based out of Lethbridge, Alberta, a unique outreach to youth and young adults. Welcome, Sid.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
Well, why don't we just start off with just kind of a sense of what Truth Matters Ministries is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Truth Matters actually began about 13 years ago now when I was youth pastoring in Canmore, Alberta. And I was approached by a group of people to go into full-time speaking to students. And it took about a year to process that. We prayed about it, our church did, and then we said, hey, this is a great missional play for us, let's do it. And so that's when we began Truth Matters Ministries. And the desire was really to help students see the reality of Christ primarily through the Word. And so that's really what we've been a part of. And now over the last number of years, probably due to age, we've shifted from just speaking to students to also working with young adults and youth leaders as well. So it's become a little more holistic in that sense, yeah.
And so is it in school settings, or is it in church settings? Or
Yeah, great question. We speak primarily in church settings, camps, retreats, so it's really unique. Throughout the year, we're at retreats, conferences, that sort of thing. And then in the summer, actually, our family packs up. We have a trailer, and we do camps all summer long. So we'll spend about 60 nights in our trailer, and we'll speak at between 7 and 9 different camps in different areas, primarily in Western Canada, actually.
So you and your wife have 2 kids?
Yeah, we do.
Two boys. How old are they?
They're 7 and 10, and they're fantastic. Lots of energy,
I'm sure.
lots of activity happening.
They must really enjoy going to these youth camps all summer long.
You know what, they get so many great opportunities. You know, every activity that you can imagine, from skateboarding to paintballing to archery. I mean, they have had some great experiences and they love it. It's
Okay,
cool.
so you really do have your finger on the pulse of today's teens, today's youth culture. We've got 3 kids. Our youngest is still a teenager. And so, you know, on behalf of all parents of teenagers watching right now, what are teenagers thinking? Like, really, what is important to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, when we think about what's important to teenagers, obviously community is very, very significant to them, and so friendship groups are huge. And so when we're teaching, because the gospel actually speaks to all areas of faith and life, right? So we want to speak what is Christ's plan in terms of how we should relate to friends and how we should be friends and what does community look like, how has he designed it. You know, those are issues. Obviously, they're in a stage where they're really trying to understand their identity, who they are, what their purpose is, and so we're speaking to that issue, and that's huge for them in their development. And then they're also entering into puberty and understanding people of the opposite sex and what do those relationships look like and how should they function in those areas. And so these are really key aspects to any adolescent going through that journey and really understanding self and moving from dependence to independence, which can create all sorts of storms in that journey. Absolutely. So there's lots of different things that go with that. Yeah.
Well, you know, who young people hang out with is so influential. You know, it can send them down a wrong path or a right path, and so youth ministry is just so vital.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways that then you're directing them and meeting them at those important times?
That's great. You know what, when we're dealing with students, part of what we're doing is we're taking a look at what are some of the significant messages that they're processing, that culture is sending their way. And then our ministry as a whole is thinking, okay, if that's the message that culture is sending, what does Christ have to say about that reality? And how should we respond to that? And so we're trying to equip and encourage students to process through that way. The messages that we're dealing with right now, you know, we've been wrestling through what are some of the key themes that we need to be engaging as an organization, and while there's lots, there's really 3 or 4 that we're starting to focus in on right now that seem to be shaping today's youth culture, and we're saying, man, we really need to get Christ's thoughts on these areas. I think one, we have a culture that's really narcissistic in essence, and so that means a really inappropriate focus on self, and that the world revolves around self, you know, and obviously that is directly contrary to what Christ calls us to, where actually our lives don't belong to ourselves, they belong to Him. And one of the things we're saying to students is very foundation of all good living is to understand that your life's actually not your own, and that's a good thing. Your life belongs to Christ. Number 1, He created you, and number 2, He died for you, so actually He has rights over you, and that's a good thing because He knows you and He loves you, and so His plan is really good for you. So we're wrestling with that issue. That's a significant one. And then the next one that we're dealing with, which is continuing to grow and creates massive concern, is obviously the issue of pornography. And so what we're finding in our culture is that pornography is the primary definer of how people should interact sexually for our students. So the stats are staggering. We're saying that average first encounter with pornography is really the age of 11. And we would suggest that that stat is very conservative in nature. Number one, it's a little bit older. We've been sharing that stat since about 2005, and there isn't a lot that's a lot of stats out there after 2005 that we're able to access. We'd suggest it's conservative. It's probably conservative because pornography is a shame-based sin as well. So people aren't, sharing exactly what's taking place in their life. And so if that's such a key issue for our students, and so really what we want to be saying to students is God has a really good plan for your life in the area of your sexuality, and this plays such a significant role in their understanding of self as well. Now, it's challenging. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, whenever I would end up at a camp or a youth group, oftentimes a message that I would hear when people were speaking about sex and sexuality was like, sex is evil, sex is terrible, sex is awful, so save it for your spouse. And, and I know that people didn't mean to say that, but that's what came across.
That was the message.
Yeah, totally. And our students are hearing that and going, no, that doesn't really sit well with me. And so what we're trying to do is be theologically correct when we're speaking about the reality that God actually created sex and sexuality very, very good. But within his plan, it's very, very good. And we really want to help our students understand that and experience it according to his design. Again, the gospel speaks to every area of life, right? So Christ speaks to this issue. And then the third issue that we're obviously dealing with our young adults is identity formation. And in our culture, primarily identity formation, according to our culture, happens through our physical reality. So our appearance or our ability to perform. Primarily for ladies, appearance. Primarily for men, and the ability to perform. And really, when we adhere to that kind of thinking, ultimately what that does is creates crisis in the lives of our kids, because they can never measure up to that standard that isn't actually reality anyways. So that creates crisis for them. And the other reason it creates crisis is it moves kids from focusing on what's really important, which is the character development. And that's what's going to see them through life, especially in the difficult times. But if that formation isn't happening throughout adolescence, then they'll be a ship without an anchor or a rudder. And the destruction of that down the road is very significant. So when you add all of those together, it can create a bit of a perfect storm, both now and for the future. And so we're saying we really need to engage these issues well from a Jesus perspective. He speaks to these issues. His plan isn't just right, but it's very good. And so that's really the passion that's driving us. And so anything we can do to speak to kids and equip leaders to deal with those issues well, that's a big win.